Hello and welcome back to my review of the Perfect Grade Wing Zero Custom EW. In this part, we'll be taking a look at the assembled mobile suit and check out his posing, with and without an action base. Assembling the mobile suit is simple enough. You'll want to attach on the legs. As I mentioned before, this is a die-cast metal piece, so the fit is quite tight and secure. The shoulders and arms will also plug in, like so. The sub-wings will attach in like so. It's a very sturdy connection. And the main wing will also attach on like so. It's also a sturdy connection, but I fear it might not be strong enough. And of course, the head will just pop on like so. So here is the completed PG Wing Zero Custom. My initial impressions are actually quite positive. A lot of the proportion issues I had are kind of drowned out by the sheer size of the kit. I think the only remaining offender is the head, but even that doesn't look too bad now. Getting the kit to stand like this was actually quite easy. The main body is very solid and sturdy due to all the screws and metal parts. Of course, I'm also folding the sub wings perpendicular to the back and just kind of hanging the main wings off the side. The legs are also slightly angled, so he has a better center of gravity. Unfortunately, he's too big to do the standard spin around, so here's a view of him from the back. So for a more detailed review of the articulation, please check out my individual parts review. Here I'm just going to point out some more general articulation, like the fact that the shoulder here can actually pull out quite a bit. Hopefully that helps with the final shot pose. And the legs can kick forward 90 degrees, though the side split is a lot less impressive. And he does get a nice 90-degree kick back. Getting him armed is quite easy. The beam sabers will just sit nicely in the sub-wing binders. And the hands do have holes for the weapon pegs to peg into. So here is the Wing Zero all armed up. You really get an idea of just how massive that twin buster rifle is. It's so long in fact that it's going to be hitting the floor, so holding it in this neutral pose should be no problem. And here he is in the shooting his twin buster rifle pose. As you might suspect, the arm is strong enough, but the wrist tends to sag a bit. I guess to be fair, it is technically holding two rifles. Of course, with the rifle split, aiming the gun suddenly becomes a lot easier. You do get more options, as you can bend the arms around without fear of the rifle weighing it down. And for melee combat, the beam sabers fit nicely and look good. Now for the elephant in the room. The Wing Zero is designed for aerial poses, yet the PG doesn't come with an action base. It's true, you'll need to supply your own. I got a pretty cheap bootleg version of the PG-00 Riser action base. It comes with this universal action base attachment, which sits nicely on the crotch between the legs. To use the action-based attachment, I highly suggest you take off this white piece here, as it tends to get in the way of the connection. Up in the air is definitely where he shines. The toes can point down, and more importantly, the sub-wings can lift up and actually display its spring gimmick. You really get an idea of just how large the main wings are, now that they aren't constantly being stuck into the ground. Even in a relatively neutral pose, he still looks pretty impressive. Here's a simple shooting pose. The legs have great articulation, and freed from gravity, he can finally start making use of it. And here is the true final shot. I only have the RG for comparison, but getting him into this pose was actually very easy. Since the action-based attachment is quite solid, you can get really ambitious. Here he is rushing off to save the Earth. I'm very impressed by this pose. Again, I think part of it is the sheer size. I will say that, as you might expect, the polycap connection on the main wings are pretty weak. I wouldn't bother rotating it in that polycap. However, you can make use of the tight clicking joint mechanism on the binders to make them more dynamic. I haven't moved them up here, since then it would be bigger than my photo booth. Now, since the action-based connection sits on the crotch between the legs, he won't be able to cross his legs over each other for his classic angelic poses. But have no fear, I have two solutions. One of the solutions is to move the attachment point to the back skirt. It's a snug fit, but I had it posed like this for a week and had no problems with it. The second solution is mainly if you want to paint. The tight fit of the first solution might scratch off some of the paint. In that case, you can flip up the back skirt and rest the attachment there instead. It's a surprisingly sturdy connection that allows the legs to pose over each other. The main con of this is the kit will be a bit closer to the ground and the feet might have to rest on the base arm. I also had it posed like this for a week, and likewise, I had no problems with it. I can already hear white reflection playing in the background. Here, we're using the first method. Here, we're using the second method. He is slightly lower to the ground and tilted upwards slightly, but he still holds the pose just fine. Here is the manga version of the same pose. He looks a little more angry in this version. Here he is pulling off the Master Grade's box art. You can probably pull off the Verkas too, which isn't saying much, considering how much Mr. Katoki likes his standing pose box arts. And here he is in his angelic pose, but armed with the split buster rifles. Personally, it's my go-to pose. So now for some of my final thoughts, as well as pros and cons. The biggest con is definitely the lack of an action base. It cripples the kit, plain and simple. If you want to buy this kit, an action base is a must. Fortunately, bootleg PG action bases are a dime a dozen. Another con is the looks. The proportions are definitely a little wacky, especially compared to the more recent RG. I, like many others, passed on this kit because I didn't like how it looked from the pictures. However, I think seeing the kit in person has changed my mind a bit. There is definitely something impressive about the scale. The wacky proportions are still there, but I can't help but feel impressed by how it looks after putting it together. Another con is the build, and by extension, the inner frame. I think the build is a bit lacking. While there was plenty of cool and interesting engineering, there was also a lot of big, blocky parts. Another thing about the build is that I experienced a weird amount of fitting issues. Not quite on the level of bootleg kits, but definitely noticeable. I think it's a combination of the die-cast metal parts and the need for tight joints. But it was definitely a pain, and I don't look forward to disassembling it for painting. The build of the wings is also pretty disappointing. The sub-wings are kind of neat, but the main wings, the main attraction, is a big letdown. It's literally two pieces sandwiching a weak polycap and some rubber feathers screwed on. I have mixed feelings about the rubber feathers. I don't particularly mind them, but having built the RG, plastic feathers seem to work fine. The inner frame also feels a bit lacking. While it still feels PG quality, it's definitely a step down from what I expected. The lack of an open hatch gimmick is also disappointing. Now, I really only have a single pro, the price. I've listed a lot of cons, to various degrees of severity, but all that can be justified by the cost. This kit retails for around $150, yet has huge shelf presence. If you add a bootleg action base in for about $20, that's $170 for one of the biggest Gunpla display pieces. In comparison to similar display pieces, the PG Strike Freedom costs $250, and the MG Deep Striker costs $200. And I had to cut some corners on the Wing Zero and its big wingspan to hit this price point. Despite all the cons I listed, I still kinda like the kit. This is definitely largely in part because of the action base. I had a lot of fun posing it in the air, and the aerial poses are by far the most impressive poses I've gotten out of any PG. If you're a big Wing Zero fan with plenty of shelf space, or just a sucker for big display pieces, I'd say pick this one up, along with an action base. If you're on the fence about the looks and it won't break your bank, I'd say go for it. Otherwise, the RG and probably the new Master Grade Verka are nice alternatives if you want a Wing Zero EW in your collection. So thank you for watching my review, please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.